Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. Creepy Darkness. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Ominous Invitation. The dense forest loomed before them, a sea of ancient trees whispering secrets to each other. The sky was an inky blue, the sun just dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to dance on their own. Jake stood at the edge of the forest, his strong jaw set in determination. His friends, gathered around him, exchanged uneasy glances. Jake was the leader, always had been. His confident demeanor often masked the turmoil inside, a past he never spoke of. Beside him was Emily, her sharp eyes scanning the tree line. Smart and resourceful, she was the planner of the group, though her anxiety often got the better of her. Sam, ever the skeptic, crossed his arms, his rational mind grappling with the strangeness of their situation. Lisa, empathetic and nurturing, stood close to Mark, who was cracking jokes to mask his insecurities. Cabin lay ahead, its silhouette barely visible in the growing darkness. Old and decrepit, it seemed to sag under the weight of its years, every creak and groan a testament to its age. "I don't like this," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This place, it feels wrong." "Come on, Emily," Jake replied, trying to sound reassuring. "We came all this way. Besides, it's just for the weekend." Sam shook his head. An anonymous invitation to a creepy old cabin in the middle of nowhere? It sounds like the start of a horror movie. "Exactly," Mark chimed in, a forced grin on his face. "An unforgettable weekend, right? What could go wrong?" Their laughter was nervous, the kind that didn't reach their eyes. The invitation had promised adventure, a break from their mundane lives. But now, standing at the cabin's threshold, doubt gnawed at them. With a deep breath, Jake pushed open the door. The hinges screamed in protest, echoing through the empty space. Inside, the cabin was a relic of the past. Dust-covered furniture stood in silent witness to years of neglect. Cobwebs draped over corners like sinister decorations, and a persistent chill hung in the air. The group stepped inside, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust. As they explored, the atmosphere grew more unsettling. Strange noises, whispers, creaks, and an occasional distant thud filled the silence. Shadows seemed to shift and move just out of sight. "Did you hear that?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "It's just the wind," Jake replied, though he didn't sound convinced. Despite their reservations, they decided to stay. Night fell quickly, wrapping the cabin in a blanket of darkness. The friends huddled around the fireplace, trying to shake off the cold and their growing sense of unease. As the hours passed, the strange noises grew louder, more insistent. An unsettling chill permeated the cabin, seeping into their bones. Emily glanced at Jake, her eyes wide with fear. "Maybe we should leave," she whispered. Jake shook his head, his expression grim. "We're staying. Whatever this is, we'll face it together." But as the night deepened, they all began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. The darkness outside seemed to press against the windows, and the whispers in the walls grew louder, more insistent, as if the cabin itself were alive, and it wanted them to stay. Chapter 2. The First Night. The fire crackled weakly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the cabin's dilapidated interior. The walls were lined with faded, peeling wallpaper, and the furniture, once grand, now sagged under the weight of decades of neglect. A thick layer of dust covered every surface, disturbed only by their hesitant movements. The air was heavy with the scent of mildew and decay. Jake poked at the fire, trying to coax more heat from the damp wood. "We just need to get through the night," he said, more to himself than to the others. "Things will look different in the morning." Emily sat on an old armchair, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "I don't think I can stay here," she muttered, her eyes darting to every creak and shadow. "It feels like the walls are closing in." Sam was pacing, his frustration evident. "This place is a death trap. We should never have come." Mark tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but even he couldn't hide his unease. "Yeah, next time we get an anonymous invite, let's opt for a beach house." Lisa, ever the peacemaker, stood up. "I'll get some more firewood. Maybe a bigger fire will help." Jake watched her go, the flashlight beam bobbing as she made her way to the back door. "Be quick, Lisa." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The fire burned low and the cabin grew colder. Emily's eyes widened with fear. "Jake, she's been gone too long." Jake stood, grabbing his flashlight. "Stay here. I'll find her." As he opened the door, a cold wind rushed in, extinguishing the remaining warmth from the fire. The darkness outside was absolute, the forest a black void. "Lisa," he called, his voice swallowed by the night. Inside, the others huddled together, the cabin's atmosphere growing more oppressive. A sudden loud thud echoed from the attic, making Emily jump. "What was that?" she whispered. Mark tried to joke, but his voice wavered. "Probably just a raccoon. A really big one." Meanwhile, Jake stumbled through the underbrush, the flashlight's beam barely piercing the darkness. "Lisa," he called again, desperation creeping into his voice. Then he saw her. She stood motionless, staring into the trees, her face illuminated by the flashlight. "Lisa, what are you doing out here?" he asked, rushing to her side. She didn't respond. Her eyes were vacant, her expression blank. Jake shook her gently. "Lisa, snap out of it." She blinked slowly, as if waking from a dream. "Jake, what? What happened? You've been out here for ages. Come on, let's get back inside." Back in the cabin, strange noises continued to plague the group. Whispers seemed to emanate from the walls, and footsteps echoed in the attic. Emily clutched at Mark's arm. "Something's not right. We need to leave." When Jake returned with Lisa, her behavior was different. She was quieter, more withdrawn, her eyes haunted. "Are you okay?" Emily asked, concerned. Lisa nodded slowly. "I'm fine, just tired." The night dragged on, each minute an eternity. Shadows moved at the edges of their vision, and the whispers grew louder, almost intelligible. Sleep was impossible. They sat together, trying to fend off the creeping dread that seemed to emanate from the very walls. As dawn approached, the first light of day barely made a dent in the cabin's gloom. Exhausted and frazzled, the friends knew one thing for certain. Whatever was happening in this cabin was far from over. Chapter 3: Unearthly Discoveries. The morning light barely pierced the dense canopy of trees surrounding the cabin, casting an eerie glow inside. The friends, exhausted and weary, sat around the cold fireplace. Jake's jaw was set in determination as he spoke. "We need to figure out what's going on here. We can't leave without answers." Emily nodded, her eyes dark with fatigue. "We should explore the cabin and the grounds. There must be something that explains all of this." They split into pairs, with Emily and Sam taking the interior, while Jake, Lisa, and Mark ventured outside. The cabin's interior was even more unsettling in daylight. Dust motes floated in the air, and the silence was oppressive. Emily and Sam began their search methodically, opening drawers and peering into forgotten nooks. In a small, dusty study, Emily found an old leather-bound diary hidden behind a row of disintegrating books. "Sam, look at this," she called, her voice tinged with excitement and dread. Sam joined her, peering over her shoulder. The diary's pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. The entries spoke of dark rituals performed by the cabin's previous occupant, a man named Elias Crowley. "He was trying to summon something," Sam muttered, a chill running down his spine. Outside, Jake, Lisa, and Mark scoured the grounds. They found a small, overgrown graveyard, the headstones weathered and cracked. "This is getting creepier by the minute," Mark said, his usual humor gone. Jake's flashlight beam fell on a partially buried box near one of the graves. He unearthed it, revealing strange symbols carved into the wood. "We should take this inside," he said, his voice grim. Back in the cabin, Emily was deep into the diary, deciphering its cryptic passages. Elias believed he was communicating with an ancient evil, she said, her voice shaking. He wrote about unexplained disappearances and sacrifices. Lisa, now back inside, paled at Emily's words. "Sacrifices? What kind of sacrifices?" Emily looked up, her eyes haunted. Human sacrifices, to appease whatever he had summoned. As they delved deeper into the diary, the cabin seemed to come alive. Strange noises grew louder, more insistent. Shadows danced just out of sight, and an icy wind blew through the cracks in the walls, despite the summer heat outside. Personal items began to vanish. Jake's flashlight disappeared, only to reappear in the attic, its beam pointing at a disturbing drawing on the wall. Lisa's scarf was found tied in a noose, hanging from a rafter. Mark's voice shook as he spoke. "It's like the cabin is trying to tell us something, or scare us away." Emily's face was pale as she continued to read. Elias wrote that the only way to stop the evil was to perform a counter-ritual. But he never finished it. He disappeared before he could. The friends looked at each other, fear and determination mingling in their eyes. They knew they had to find a way to complete the ritual and break the curse. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows once more, they couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin was watching, waiting for its next victim. The paranormal activity intensified. Whispers turned into screams, footsteps into pounding. The cabin, once merely eerie, now felt malevolent, as if it had a will of its own. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the dim light bulbs, felt like a prelude to something terrible. As night fell, the friends huddled together, the diary their only guide. They knew they had to decipher the ritual, but with each passing hour, the cabin seemed more determined to stop them. The ancient evil Elias had awakened was still here, and it was hungry. Chapter 4: Descent into Madness. Night fell again, bringing with it a suffocating darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. The group's exhaustion was palpable, but sleep was impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper from the walls, kept them on edge. Fear and paranoia began to take their toll, eroding the group's once solid bond. Jake paced back and forth, his frustration evident. "We need to stay focused. We have to figure out this ritual." But his words fell on deaf ears. Emily sat in a corner, rocking back and forth, her eyes wide with terror. She kept muttering about the diary, her mind trapped in the cryptic passages she'd been deciphering. "It's coming for us. Elias's evil. It's coming." Sam's skepticism had given way to raw fear. "We should never have come here. This place is cursed." Mark, usually the joker, was silent, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He clutched a broken chair leg like a weapon, ready to strike at any shadow that moved. Lisa tried to keep the peace, but her own fear was evident. We need to stick together. Arguing won't help us. The tension was unbearable. Accusations flew. Sam blamed Jake for bringing them here. Jake accused Sam of not taking the situation seriously. Mark's laughter, once comforting, now grated on their nerves. Then Emily screamed. She clutched her head, eyes wide in terror. "It's in my mind. It's showing me things." Jake rushed to her side, but she pushed him away, her eyes wild. "I saw it. I saw what Elias summoned. It wants us. It wants our souls." Her vision shattered whatever hope remained. The group's trust was gone, replaced by a palpable fear of each other. They decided to leave, desperate to escape the cabin's malevolent grip. Panic set in. Lisa's breathing grew rapid, her eyes wide with terror. "We're trapped. We're never getting out." Jake's frustration boiled over. "There has to be a way. We can't just be stuck here." But no matter how far they walked, the cabin loomed before them, an ominous sentinel in the darkness. The whispers grew louder, mocking their futile attempts to escape. Desperation clawed at their sanity. Emily's vision haunted them, each shadow a reminder of the evil lurking just out of sight. The forest, once merely eerie, now felt alive, conspiring to keep them within its grasp. Jake tried to rally them. "We'll figure this out. We have to." But his words rang hollow. The group's mental states deteriorated further, fear and paranoia feeding off each other. Personal hauntings plagued them. Sam saw the ghostly figure of his long-dead brother. Mark heard his father's disapproving voice. Lisa felt the cold touch of unseen hands. By the time dawn approached, they were shadows of their former selves, broken by the relentless terror. They stumbled back to the cabin, the only place left to go, each step heavy with the realization that they were prisoners in a nightmare that had no end. Chapter 5. The Curse Unveiled. As dawn broke over the cabin, it brought little relief. The group was on edge, their nerves frayed from the previous night's terror. The forest outside remained an inescapable labyrinth, and their confinement within the cabin's decaying walls felt more pronounced than ever. Inside, the atmosphere was stifling. Emily sat hunched over the diary, her eyes scanning the cryptic entries with a desperation born of their dire situation. Her fingers trembled as she traced the faded ink. "There's something more here," she said, her voice hoarse from fear. Elias Crowley wasn't just performing rituals. He was trying to bind a malevolent entity, something ancient and powerful. Jake, pacing the room, glanced at Emily. "What's the entity? How do we stop it?" Emily shook her head, frustration evident. "It's not clear. The diary is incomplete, but it speaks of an ancient curse tied to the cabin. The entity feeds on fear and despair." Sam, his face ashen, joined the others. "We need to find anything related to these rituals. There must be something we can use." In their frantic search, Jake discovered a loose floorboard in the corner of the study. With Mark's help, he pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "Looks like we found something," Jake said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. They descended into the hidden room beneath the cabin. It was filled with strange artifacts, carved idols, faded ritualistic symbols etched into the stone walls, and dusty tomes stacked in disarray. The air was thick with the stench of decay, mingling with the overpowering scent of something old and sinister. Emily's heart raced as she examined the artifacts. These symbols, they're part of the ritual Elias tried to complete. By disturbing them, we might have triggered it. Before they could react, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing their torches. The temperature plummeted, Shadows leaped from the walls, twisting into grotesque forms. Supernatural entities began to manifest more aggressively, their presence palpable. The group's terror reached new heights. Cabins seemed to come alive with menace. Objects flew through the air, and the walls wept with dark, viscous ooze. Emily's voice trembled as she shouted over the din. "We need to complete the ritual. It's the only way to banish whatever is here." As the hauntings became more targeted, each member of the group faced their deepest fears and regrets. Sam saw his brother's ghost, accusing him of neglect. Mark was haunted by visions of his father's death, blaming him for not being there. Lisa was plagued by memories of a lost loved one, her sorrow manifesting as vengeful apparitions. The emotional impact was devastating. The group, already strained, was now pushed to their breaking points. Fear and despair were tangible, feeding the entity's power. Emily's face was pale as she looked at Jake. "We have to finish the ritual now. It's the only way to end this." With their minds unraveling and their bodies pushed to their limits, the group struggled to piece together the fragmented ritual. Each step was fraught with peril, as the very cabin seemed determined to keep them from completing their task. The malevolent force that had been awakened would not be easily silenced. Chapter 6: The Fight for Survival. The hidden room was a maelstrom of chaos. The supernatural entities roared and writhed, their forms grotesque and shifting. The group, huddled together, struggled to stay calm amid the chaos. Shadows lunged and swirled, their cold touch searing through clothing and skin. Every surface seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and the air was thick with the stench of rot. Jake gripped a makeshift weapon, his knuckles white. "Stay close. We need to keep fighting." Emily's eyes were wide with determination and fear as she flipped through the diary's last pages. "There's a way to break the curse, but we need specific items from the forest and a ritual to counter the Dark One." Sam, previously the skeptic, was now faced with undeniable horrors. A spectral figure of a child appeared before him, its hollow eyes pleading. He stumbled back, his face pale. This is real. It's all real." The tension in the group had reached a breaking point. With each passing moment, their mental fortitude crumbled. Mark, once the comic relief, was now visibly shaken. His jokes had long since disappeared, replaced by a grim resolve. "We have to do this. There's no other choice." The cabin shook, as if in protest, and more entities emerged from the walls. The friends were under relentless attack. The floor cracked open, and the walls bled arc, viscous substance that oozed towards them. Emily's voice was barely audible over the din. "We need to gather the items. It's the only chance we have." The group fought their way through the cabin and into the forest. The once familiar trees now seemed like twisted silhouettes, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Every rustle in the underbrush and every snap of a twig heightened their paranoia. Emily led the way, guided by the diary's cryptic instructions. They needed a black feather, a vial of moonlit dew, and a shard of obsidian. Each item was hidden deep within the forest, guarded by the very entities they were trying to escape. As they collected the items, the forest itself seemed to turn against them. A menacing fog rolled in, and the ground shifted beneath their feet. The friends were exhausted and battered, their bodies and minds pushed to the limit. They returned to the cabin, the items clutched tightly in their hands. With the last vestiges of their strength, they prepared for the counter-ritual. The dark forces continued their assault, more aggressive and vengeful than ever. Emily set up the ritual space in the cabin's main room, the items arranged according to the diary's instructions. The friends, despite their fear and exhaustion, began the incantations. Their voices, though shaky, echoed through the cabin, merging with the cacophony of supernatural screams. The ritual's energy surged, pushing back against the dark entities. The cabin trembled as the malevolent force fought to maintain its hold. For a moment, hope seemed within reach as the darkness was driven back. But the outcome was uncertain. They were in a desperate battle for survival, with the curse still holding its grip. As the ritual continued, they knew that their fight was far from over. The curse's true nature remained shrouded in darkness, and the final confrontation was yet to come. Chapter 7. The Ritual. The atmosphere inside the cabin was thick with tension and anticipation. The friends gathered in the main room, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of candles they had managed to salvage. The items collected from the forest lay spread out on the floor, arranged in a crude circle based on the diary's instructions. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke and the faint aroma of the items, mingling with the pervasive stench of decay. Emily's hands trembled as she placed the final artifact, a shard of obsidian, into position. She glanced at her friends, each of them showing signs of profound exhaustion and fear. "This is it. We have to see this through." Jake stood tall, despite the weight of the situation. His eyes were resolute, though his voice wavered slightly. "We've faced the worst already. We have to hold it together. If we fail, everything we've been through will be for nothing." Each friend took a moment to reflect on their journey, confronting their inner demons. Sam, usually skeptical, realized the depth of his own fear and regret, shaped by the apparitions he had faced. He clenched his fist, determination hardening his features. "No matter what happens, I'm in this to the end." Mark, his usual humor gone, stared at the ritual setup with a mix of fear and resolve. He thought about his father and the shadow of his mistakes. "Let's finish this." Lisa, her face pale but resolute, took a deep breath. The loss she had felt earlier was now a driving force. "We need to end this, for everyone we've lost." As the ritual began, the cabin's malevolent presence intensified. The walls groaned and shuddered, and the very air seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Shadows twisted and writhed, attempting to disrupt their efforts. The friends chanted the incantations, their voices nearly drowned out by the cacophony of supernatural interference. Jake's leadership was tested as the group struggled to stay united. His command and presence provided a semblance of order amidst the chaos. He shouted over the din, rallying his friends. "Keep going. We're almost there." The ritual reached a critical point. The candles flared brightly, casting eerie, dancing shadows across the walls. The symbols on the floor glowed with an otherworldly light. But the darkness fought back ferociously, manifesting as nightmarish forms that clawed and lashed out. Each member of the group was forced to confront their ultimate fears, visions of their deepest regrets and failures. Emily's voice rose in a desperate plea. "We're close. Just a little more." The cabin shook violently, the very foundation trembling under the force of the battle between the ritual's power and the entity's rage. The friends were pushed to their limits, their physical and emotional endurance stretched to the breaking point. In a final, terrifying confrontation, the dark entities surged with a ferocious intensity. The friends, their bodies and minds near collapse, chanted with every ounce of strength they had left. The cabin's malevolence was palpable, a suffocating darkness that seemed to resist their every effort. As the ritual reached its climax, the dark energy began to wane, the shadows retreating, though the outcome remained uncertain. The friends knew that failure would mean their ultimate doom, but their resolve was unwavering. They fought through their terror, determined to end the curse that had haunted them. Chapter 8: Resolution and Aftermath. The room fell eerily silent as the final chant left their lips. The dark entities that had plagued the group seemed to retreat into the walls, their vengeful cries fading into nothingness. The oppressive weight that had hung over the cabin lifted, replaced by an uneasy calm. Emily, trembling, wiped her forehead, her voice barely above a whisper. I think we did it." The symbols on the floor began to dim, the candles' flames flickering out one by one. The once bloody walls and floors were now just cracked and aged. The air, though still cold, felt less suffocating. The shadows, once hostile, receded into the corners of the room. Jake surveyed the cabin, his face etched with exhaustion but relief. "We managed to break the curse. For now, at least." The friends, though physically drained, felt a sense of accomplishment. They had faced their deepest fears and survived. But the ordeal had left them deeply scarred. They were changed, their experiences forever marking them. Sam stared at the now quiet forest through the cabin's broken windows. "I never thought I'd see the day when I'd believe in something like this. I guess we all have our limits." Mark nodded, his usual humor replaced by a reflective solemnity. "We've been through hell. I'm just grateful we made it out alive." Lisa, her eyes red from exhaustion and tears, clung to the others for support. "I'm sorry for everything that happened. We've all lost so much." Emily took a deep breath, her hands still trembling. "We all have our demons. I hope we can find a way to heal." They gathered their belongings, the weight of their shared trauma palpable. The forest, though now silent and still, seemed to watch them as they prepared to leave. The path they had once been unable to escape was now clear, the way out marked by the faint light of dawn breaking through the trees. Friends made their way out of the forest, their steps heavy but determined. As they emerged into the open, they felt a tentative sense of freedom. They had survived, but their ordeal had changed them in ways they were only beginning to understand. But as they drove away from the forest, a lingering sense of unease settled over them. The darkness they had faced might have been pushed back, but it had not been entirely vanquished. Shadows flickered in the corners of their vision, and the faintest whisper of fear seemed to cling to the edges of their consciousness. Emily glanced back at the forest, a chill running down her spine. "Do you think it's truly over?" Jake shook his head, his eyes grim. "I don't know. But we've survived. For now." The forest receded into the distance, its secrets buried once more. But the friends knew that the darkness they had faced might one day rise again. For now, they were free, but their bond, forged in terror, would forever mark them, a reminder of the evil they had encountered and the strength they had found within themselves.